on est ici avec Marc Hamaker.
You've got to switch to English.
Yeah, I got to switch to English. All right.
Sorry.
So, Marc, you flew in from New York. You're a marketing manager.
That's right. Product marketing manager, but I can actually operate Smoke fairly well. So I thought I would take everyone through a little bit of Smoke, and Marc-André is going to explain a little what I'm doing in French, and I'll just kind of give you some highlights of what I'm doing here.
L'idée qu'on voulait faire, c'est de vous montrer rapidement certains des points clés dans le Smoke, puis de voir comment que ça fonctionne bien sur un Mac, justement en commençant dans Final Cut, parce que pour la première fois, vous n'êtes pas obligé de changer de station et vous n'êtes pas obligé pour ceux qui connaissent le workflow, là, de tout sortir des frames en DPX, puis d'importer ça dans le Smoke, puis de commencer à faire le travail. On a ici une séquence dans Final Cut Pro. So tell us a little bit about what you're looking at.
Yeah, well, I figure everybody in the room's seen this product before. So I'm in Final Cut, and this is just a project that we've been working on. Our QA team, our production testing team has been using this to work to test some of the interoperability with Smoke. And what I thought I'd do is show you how easy it is to go from Final Cut right into Smoke. So we're going to do it live.
Alors, on a des clips ici qui sont en Apple ProRes. Et, by the way, tous les clips sont sur le réseau en ce moment. Alors, ça, c'est une complexité qu'on a décidé de rajouter ce soir pour vous montrer qu'on a quand même beaucoup de performance, même si vos images ne sont pas nécessairement en local. C'est sûr que pour avoir la meilleure performance, on vous recommande d'avoir du storage rapide local. Mais dans ce cas-ci, toutes les images sont sur le réseau. On a décidé, on pense que ça va marcher.
All right. So, exported the XML. And then I'll just launch Smoke. So this is really cool. This is what Marcus was talking about, I think. Smoke and Final Cut on the same platform. That's okay. That's not anything, apparently. So I'm going to launch right in. So we're going to do more than just conform this list. We're actually going to use the exact same media that we were using inside of Final Cut Pro, which is ProRes media.
Pour ceux qui sont familiers avec Smoke, vous allez vite vous retrouver, retomber sur vos pattes. C'est Smoke. C'est pas une version spéciale pour le Mac, c'est pas une version express ou une version light. C'est vraiment Smoke qu'on a transporté sur le Mac. Vous avez la même interface, la même fonctionnalité, les mêmes raccourcis clavier.
All right, so I've just gone into import XML. You've got to stop laughing. I don't know what he's saying. And I'm going to load the XML file I just exported. So what I'm going to do is say, let's link with those audio and video files. So I don't want to recreate that media. I don't want to move it. I don't want to transfer it. I want to use that same media. Now, once this loads up, you'll see it's parsing the XML. And then instantly, Smoke's going to find that media. So it's going to look in that same location. That's what these check marks mean. So if I step over here, you can see all the different things. You can see it's looking at the original ProRes media. And what I'll do is just select everyone. And I just want to link to the media. I don't want to copy it. So that's what I'll do here. And it's basically taking Smoke this long to say, OK, that's valid media, and we can work with it. And then the next step, I'm going to just tell it to put it back in the same order that we saw on the timeline. And I'll show you the timelines again in a second so you see it's exactly the same. And we'll just decide how many heads and tail frames we want. We'll do something like 5. And then I'll go over to relink and just relink that. So it basically took me that long to create this. Here's all of this media that we linked to. And here's the actual clip. And I'll load it up here in Smoke, and you'll see it as a timeline. So this is that actual timeline that we created. And since we're on the same platform, we can, of course, do this. And I'll just show you. So there you can see that structure coming through in Smoke. And really mirroring what we had in Final Cut, including the different layer structure. And even here where we get into some of the soft effects in Smoke, it's actually recreated that. So if I turn on the viewer, you can see this is just a picture-in-picture effect. And that's been translated through from what we were actually seeing inside of Final Cut Pro. So just a really nice workflow. The idea is it doesn't slow you down. You can quickly get into this and start finishing right away.
L'idée, c'est de faire votre pré-montage dans Final Cut, d'exporter une XML. On est capable de relinker au clip directement. Il n'y a pas de transformation de médias. On a soft importé tous les clips. Donc, c'est vraiment un lien vers le clip, comme vous le feriez dans Final Cut. Alors, on a accès directement à ça. Même chose sur Avid. Vous pouvez travailler sur Avid, exporter un AAF, et directement, nous, on va se reconnecter à vos fichiers DNxHD.
Yeah, so it's great. So I could start working with this media, start doing whatever is required in finishing. So that was an example of infrastructure and workflow. We thought we'd have some more fun with more of a post-production example, some commercial work.
Oui, parce que jusqu'à date, c'est tous des trucs qu'on peut faire dans Final Cut. Ce que j'ai demandé à Marc, c'est de préparer un démo de plein de trucs qu'on ne peut pas faire dans Final Cut ou qu'on peut faire assez difficilement ou justement d'avoir à passer dans After Effects, d'aller dans Motion, faire des masques dans Photoshop, puis de revenir, puis de tout traquer vos médias. On va vous montrer un spot.
So I'm going to start by playing back a final spot. You want to explain that this was done at, this is a Super Bowl spot from a couple of years ago. And it's a great example of more than just, you know, kind of simple effects, some of the more complicated compositing work you can do in Smoke. You have 5 seconds if you want to explain.
Final horse for this year's Hits team is Thunder. Thunder! Maybe next year.
All right, so let's take a look at that timeline. It's a little more complicated than the last one we saw. And you can see, here it is. We've got all of our different audio tracks, everything brought together. And I'll just show you some of the complexity of it. You might not realize just about every scene is touched in some way. So they replaced the background here. A lot of shots are flipped around. Many of these shots with the animals are green screen shots. Some of them are entire composites that they created from different elements. And I'll show you this one in a second. Here you can see an effect that came in from the offline, just a simple picture-in-picture. And what we'll do is we'll just go through and I'll show you how quickly you can just start to tackle from the simple problems to the more complicated ones as we move through the timeline.
Donc on a ici vraiment un exemple parfait du genre de spot qui fait briller les outils d'Autodesk parce que c'est tous des effets spéciaux invisibles. Donc il y a plein de trucages qui sont là, qui ne crient pas effet spécial. Finalement, on a le offline qui arrive de Final Cut, puis on a tous les éléments qui sont replacés dans le timeline et on va tout compositer ça ensemble.
So the first thing I'm going to do is just some simple paint work. So this happens all the time. You have to remove logos from things. You have to add logos in, replace logos. And in this case, we're looking for an example. Let's say we want to remove this element from the hat. Now what I'm going to do is use the Paint's recursive clone tool. So this is pretty standard. But the great news is I didn't have to leave the editorial environment. I'm simply accessing the tool right here, and I can clone that out. But this is about 125 frames of video. And it's going to be really hard to do that by hand. So this is where you start seeing how Smoke really integrates the tools that you need to tackle these kind of problems. So I'll step into something called Auto Paint. And this is great because what I'll do is I'll do the same thing, right? Just a simple paint stroke. And then I'll step back out. And if we look at what's happened, Smoke has actually captured that stroke. It's a little hard to see there, but see it painting on over those frames. And then what we can do is say, let's apply this to an entire clip. I don't want to do this on 1 frame or 2 frames or whatever. I'm just going to step in and do it, but of course the hat moves, so this is where we want to start accessing some other tools. So we'll go ahead and access the stabilizer. So even right here in the Paint application, the stabilizer is built in, and it will just accurately lock on and track there. One of the things you'll find is that these boxes track better than just about anything else you're going to find out there.
Donc déjà un motion tracker qui est extrêmement puissant. Et c'est le genre de shot justement où je me rappelle, il y en a qui se souviennent de Commotion. De Puffin Design. C'est le genre de truc où est-ce que quand je travaille sur Avid, je me dis bon, ok, cette shot-là, va falloir que je la sorte dans Commotion, puis je passe tout le week-end à traquer puis à dessiner, puis faire 8 secondes d'image qui prenaient tout le week-end. Puis là, tu es là, puis tu es dans le même logiciel, tu fais juste prendre ton clip, tu te dis ok, je vais peindre ça, je vais enlever le logo, je vais prendre mon tracker. Tous les outils sont à la même place.
And I'm going to stop it before it finishes because it's fairly dramatic if you can see the before and after. So nice thing about that paint track is it copied all the grain, it copied all that. So it really saved me a lot of time. And you can see when it pops right back in, you really see the difference. And then here's what I like about working in Smoke. I don't have to mess with that media. I don't have to look for it. I don't have to do anything. If I go to my timeline, I just swap that new shot in, and then I've got it painted out and in context. And then the really nice thing about working here in Smoke is if I want to make any changes or access that, well, everything I'm doing is actually tracked down here in the history of the clip. So I could even step back in and start making changes to this, even after I've done it and put it back in the timeline and moved on if I want to come back to it. So it's a really nice consolidated all-in-one workflow, even for this individual tool.
Pour ceux qui sont habitués de travailler avec Final Cut Pro, avec After Effects, on est habitué d'empiler des effets les uns par-dessus les autres. Puis quand tu essaies de trouver qu'est-ce qui ne marche pas dans ta shot, tu es obligé d'aller dans ton Effect Editor, puis là tu cherches tous tes petits sliders, tous tes petits boutons, puis tu gosses avec jusqu'à temps que ça marche. Dans ce cas-ci, on a un historique, comme dans Photoshop. En fait, tu peux voir exactement qu'est-ce que tu as fait sur ta shot au fur et à mesure, puis de faire des modifications.
All right, so while Marc-André was explaining that, I moved down to another section, and I just added a color corrector. So we all have to do color correction. And this one, we actually have to do two kinds of color correction. We're going to do some technical color correction to fix a problem in production, and then we're going to do a little bit of look creation using some of the masking tools here. So what I'll do is I'll step into the color correction editor, and you can see it's a nice heads-up display. This is our simple RGB color corrector. It works great. We also have a really powerful tool here called the Color Warper, and you can see the layout of this. It's like trackballs, more like what you'd expect in a telecine, and you can access shadows, midtones, and highlights, work in the gamma curves, things like this. But what's really powerful, what makes this a great color corrector, is the ability to work on selectives. So I've got 3 selectives, and while you explain this, I'm going to go ahead and set up a couple of selective color corrections.
Donc, il y a deux gros engins de correction de couleur dans le Smoke. Il y a le Color Corrector et il y a le Color Warper. Puis ce qui est le fun avec le Color Warper, c'est que vous allez trouver beaucoup d'outils très puissants, comme on verrait dans les suites d'étalonnage. Et ce que ça vous permet de faire, c'est d'aller justement sélectionner des zones de couleur beaucoup plus facilement. Ceux qui travaillent dans Final Cut avec le Secondary Color Corrector, avec la pipette, c'est ça à la puissance 10. Donc on peut sélectionner vraiment des zones puis aller corriger ça très facilement. C'est ce que Marc est en train de faire ici.
So what I'm doing is I changed the color of the trees. Now the reason I'm doing that, I didn't actually explain that, is we want to create more of a look like it's fall across a couple of these shots here. Remember, the spot takes place over different times in the year. So I did one color correction on the green. I'm doing another one here just to remove some of the blue here, and then I can start tinting that over, maybe add a little bit of yellow or orange in that. And then if I realize that, you know, now my subject is kind of blending in with the background, well, I can even do something more specific like this and just isolate our horse character there. And we'll just add a little bit of blur to these masks so we get a nice smooth color correction. And then on the result, maybe I'll just start dropping, you know, the saturation a little bit on him, maybe a couple points down. And maybe we'll bring up the level a little bit. So I'll just start kind of playing around until I get this to where I like it. So you can see what I was quickly able to do is take the shot from something like this to something like this. So this is our technical color correction for this shot.
Donc vous avez vu que c'est quand même assez rapide, c'est assez efficace, c'est facile d'aller dessiner dans les zones sur lesquelles vous allez travailler. C'est comme ça dans le Color Warper, vous allez voir, c'est comme ça aussi quand vous travaillez avec le Keyer. C'est très facile, on dessine beaucoup. Vous voyez, Marc travaille avec une tablette graphique, c'est des outils qui sont faits pour travailler avec des tablettes, justement parce que tu veux travailler sur ton image, tu veux peindre des choses sur ton image, tu veux travailler avec ta tablette puis avoir accès directement, puis faire des beaux petits mouvements avec ta main qui vont bien représenter le genre d'animation que tu veux faire s'il y a lieu.
So there's a couple of other places that need that same color correction. So, and note, I rendered that really quickly. I'll show you some more rendering speeds in a few minutes while Marc-André was explaining. But if we go back to this scene, this one looks great. This next shot should really reflect the same color correction. And this is where working in the timeline is nice. So it's great to have great tools, but having them integrated into that timeline linear workflow makes a lot of sense, because now I can drop that color correction here and apply that same technical color correction between these two scenes. And then the next thing I want to do is start some of that look creation. So let me just go back to my standard viewer, and I'll zoom in, and I'll just go to an empty layer. We're going to go ahead and put a cut point there. And now we can start applying sort of soft effects that sort of cascade down through. So this is like almost like an adjustment layer. And now any color correction I make here, and we'll go to full screen, starts making changes to everything underneath it. So what I'll do is just maybe bring the contrast up, bring this down, we'll drop the saturation. I don't want to see this everywhere, I just want to see this kind of around the edge of the screen, okay? So if we look here, I've kind of destroyed the whole point of what I was doing, so now I need to find a way to mask this and reveal it through. So while you explain, I'm going to use a wipe, and I'll pick your favorite wipe pattern.
Oh, thank you. Alors, ce qu'on a fait ici, c'est vraiment que c'est très facile, non seulement de copier-coller des effets, puis ensuite les ajuster, mais il y a un truc qui se retrouve dans Smoke qui vous permet de faire un peu comme des adjustment layers dans Photoshop, dans After Effects, où est-ce que vous allez mettre un filtre.
That's it? Yeah, good.
So, et on va mettre un beau wipe en cœur. C'est supposément mon wipe préféré. Mais en fait, ce qu'il faut voir, c'est quand on travaille avec un wipe, c'est pas juste un wipe comme vous êtes habitué de le voir, c'est vraiment un masque. Un masque qui a énormément de points. Et on est capable d'animer tous ces points-là et de créer des masques très facilement. Y en a-tu qui travaillent avec le 8-point garbage mask dans Final Cut?
All right,
Je vous
so
plains. I was just saying how Gmask is cool compared to
the Gmask is
masking
great.
tools
So we're going to do a bunch of
in Final
Gmask
Cut.
stuff because this is a great tool. You'll use this all the time. So what I've done is I've just adjusted it. I'm basically creating a mat, and then I can go in and adjust it. And you can see you have a lot of options. You can adjust the inside and outside softness of a mask like this, and you can make these pretty complicated. I'll keep this one fairly simple in the interest of time, but I'm just going to kind of start working this way. And of course, each of these can be adjusted individually. And I'm just isolating our horse character. So I want to bring back that color correction we spent that time doing on the horse. Now, the problem is that our dog is in the scene as well, and we're losing the color correction there. So let's add another mask. So being able to just drop these masks in wherever you need them is great. I'll go ahead and just soften that in that way, and then we'll deal with the next problem, which is, of course, that the dog is moving. So again, just like you saw in Paint, anytime I need it, I can really go in and find that tracker, and we'll just drop it here. This is a good breed of dog for doing tracking, but you'll see through the demo that this works. It works really well. And we'll just go ahead and analyze that. So being able to come in and track things that are sort of non-standard tracking points. And you see we're not looking for the most accurate track in the world. We just want to kind of follow that. So it's just kind of following the motion of our character in our scene there. And then that translates through to move our mask with it. So when you're doing this kind of color correction, this is great. You know, the selective color corrections are great. Maybe you want to adjust it more. Maybe you can't quite get it. The colors are too close. This is a great way to enhance that. Or in this case, when you're trying to create an entire look here using the color correction tools, being able to drop that mask in and then even animate and adjust that by hand is nice.
Vous voyez, toutes les effets, toutes les options, tous les outils dont on aurait besoin dans un contexte sont toujours disponibles. Dans ce cas-ci, on a le correcteur de couleur, on a accès à nos masques, on a accès à notre tracker. Tous les outils sont toujours très très proches les uns des autres. Alors dans ce cas-ci, vous voyez, ce qu'on a fait, c'est très très facilement faire des masques animés et on a traqué. Il y en a-tu qui ont vu Lord of the Rings? C'est un petit film fait en Nouvelle-Zélande. Ben, Legolas, là, la face qui brille tout le long, même effet.
All right, so we've got our look sort of created here, and you can see the difference, the before and after. And then, of course, if we look, I only did that over one of our scenes. Again, just to emphasize the nice thing about working in the timeline, I'll just trim that back, and you can see it's actually respected the animation where it falls. I could go back, I could adjust the mask for each of these scenes. And what I've done is I haven't rendered anything except that first color correction. So we still have this masking and this color correction live. We still have this color correction live. And I'll just go ahead and show you again the rendering speed.
Alors, ce qu'on a fait ici, c'est qu'on a juste tout simplement étendu l'effet. Tout ce qu'on a fait, c'est qu'on a trimé. Donc, dans Smoke, il y a un timeline. Vous êtes capable de faire du trim, des inserts, des overrides, faire du slip and slide, tous les outils de montage dont vous avez besoin. Dans ce cas-ci, c'est très, très pratique parce que ce qu'on a fait, c'est qu'on a étendu l'effet un peu plus tôt. Puis ça a pris le temps de faire le process. Oui, évidemment, c'est un logiciel qui travaille en très, très, très haute résolution. Même si on travaille avec des fichiers ProRes, tout ce qui est fait dans Smoke est rendu en non compressé en 444. Donc, c'est pour ça que ça vous prend des gros disques durs quand même pour travailler, parce que vous travaillez tout le temps dans la meilleure résolution possible.
All right, so
et dans ce cas-ci, par contre, je sais qu'on voit beaucoup sur le web, ça parle du real-time, pas du real-time. Je veux dire, je ne sais pas si vous avez vu, mais ça n'a pas pris grand temps à renderer cette petite séquence-là.
Okay, so I've moved on to another scene, so let's keep going. So we've got some color correction going on. Now we want to do some keying. And chroma keying is something that we've all had to face. And the great thing about working in Smoke is it's got a great keyer built right into it. So I'll just start by adding a compositing effect here in the timeline, and I can start moving this layer around or whatever I need to do to it. But you'll see when I step into the editor for that, you know, of course I can move around in 3D space, but what I really want to do is access the keyer. And the keying tools here are really second to none. This isn't a plugin, this is all right here in the software. And I'm going to use something called the master keyer, and you have a good way of explaining this, so you can maybe explain that in French while I do it. I'm just going to kind of paint the green away.
Ben moi, je dois dire que le master keyer, c'est comme... Puis les keyers en général dans les outils de Autodesk, c'était les features les plus cool dont je me suis rappelé de mon cours avec Patrick, justement, parce que ce que Marc vient de faire là, c'est vraiment de dessiner là où il y a du vert. C'est qu'il a travaillé avec tous les plugins de keying d'After Effects. De faire des keys, puis de gosser avec Composite Wizard, puis de faire un edge wrap, puis là s'assurer que ça fonctionne. OK, regarde, on dessine là où il y a du vert, c'est simple. Puis il y a toutes sortes d'outils pour corriger ton masque. Fait que c'est sûr que la puissance d'un keyer, on le voit quand on regarde le masque. Dans ce cas-ci, il y a un petit peu de crotte dans le noir, une petite crotte dans le blanc. On est capable de très, très, très facilement ajuster ça.
Yep, so I get it about this far, and you can see I can adjust everything on screen here. And then the keyer really works with you. So, you know, this isn't perfect, but watch, I'll just add a patch, and I'll just drop that there. So it's actually figured out what that part of the image is supposed to be. And we've got a little bit of spill here in the dog, so let's drop a patch in there. And you can see these keys working together. We can adjust the range and the softness for each of these. We don't care about this area. We're going to mask that out. But check this out when we look here. It's hard to see like that. So let me just add a quick garbage mask in here, and I'll show you what the keyer is also doing for us, which is it's removing that color. So it's figuring out where that spill's hitting.
Donc, tous ces outils-là fonctionnent automatiquement. Ce qui est le fun avec les patchs, c'est que vous pouvez en rajouter. Fait que c'est vraiment, vous faites une première passe de keying, ça va très vite. Puis vous nettoyez après en faisant des patchs, seulement en sélectionnant carrément la zone où il y a un problème. C'est aussi simple que ça. Ça vous permet de faire plein de shots rapidement.
And then I'll just use a mask again to drop that off to the side. And I've got my shot coming together. And this one looks pretty good, but you know, there's some of that background maybe from the shot before. I'm not really sure if we need it, but just in case those same colors are there, you know, don't forget I can still grab that color correction and even drop it in there. Oops, if I drop it to the correct layer there. This is,
il y a des undo dans Smoke.
So see, I've added it just to add a little bit of that orange in the back. I don't know what he said, but I'm sure it was very funny.
So there's an undo feature.
There is an undo feature.
Yes.
Yeah,
we put that in recently.
There's multiple. Yeah,
no?
I usually never make mistakes, so I don't know where that button is. So. But anyway, so now we've got our chroma key shot done. Okay, so we've stayed pretty simple. Let's move into some more complicated effects. And these are the really challenging ones, the ones that make you wish you'd stayed home for the day. This one, do you want to introduce what is happening here while I kind of set this up?
Évidemment, parce que c'était trop difficile, ils n'ont pas filmé le chien en même temps à côté du cheval. Ils ont décidé de prendre deux valeurs de plan, puis ils ont dit « OK, ça serait le fun si on mettait le chien plus petit dans un coin. » Donc, ils n'ont pas tourné ça en même temps. Il y a de l'éclairage dans un bar, il y a de la pluie. Et là, il va falloir compositer le chien, le dalmatien, dans le coin, à côté du cheval, puis que ça a l'air réaliste.
Right.
Et en plus, le cheval fait de l'ombre sur la zone où est le chien.
So what we're doing is we're starting out to do this composite. We've got to remove the dog from the scene. The first problem is color correction, right? So you can see here that this shot is changing over time and it doesn't quite match the background. So let's go ahead and use that same color correction tool. This example is going to incorporate just about everything we've done so far. And if we just look at this in context, you'll see what the problem is. It's not quite matching the background, partly because the rain's coming in front of it. So what I'm going to do is step to the color warper again. I'm going to leave it in this mode so you can see all the tools here. And I'm going to start by selecting maybe a little bit of the dog there. And instead of doing a selective color correction, I'm going to do a match. And you can see how that starts to pull the color between them. But it's still not really working for the background. So I can start adding these matches sort of on top of each other. And they sort of add two. Now that's a little too dark, so we'll go over here to the side. And we'll start kind of bringing it up there. So now they're matching better.
I was just going to say, encore une fois ici, on choisit des zones, on dessine sur les zones qu'on veut utiliser. Donc c'est très très facile de faire des sélections puis de dire bon mais moi j'ai besoin de matcher ça et ça et ça, débrouille-toi.
Yeah, and now I've gone to the in shot, and I can just keep kind of going back through these and getting them to match until they're just about where they need to be. I can even go to the middle of the shot and do a selection here. And you get the idea. We're kind of just matching that through to eliminate that big change because of the water coming in front of the dog. Now that was the easy part, because the next part gets more complicated. That's where we actually have to start removing the dog from the background. And even though this is pretty contrasty, we're never going to get a luminance key on this, and it wasn't shot on green screen. So what I'm going to do is use the same GMask tool we were looking at before. And you can explain it while I get this set up.
Dans ce cas-ci, c'est sûr qu'on n'est pas capable de keyer ça. On a beau avoir des bons keyers dans Smoke, vous ne serez pas capable d'enlever et le cheval, et la pluie, et les roches, puis garder juste le chien. Donc, on va utiliser l'outil de Gmask, Garbage Mask. I don't know if you knew this, but Garbage Mask in French, we actually call it potato cache.
I did not know that, and I don't know if I believe you.
Well, because it looks like a potato.
Oh, okay.
So, we call it a cache-patate. Y en a-tu ici qui utilisent le terme cache-patate pour vrai, là?
I can see that extra time.
OK, Garbage Mask.
Having the bar open ahead of time.
Gmask ici avec...
All right, so here's the problem, though. I have to cut this dog out. It's going to be essentially a rotoscoping task. This is going to take a while to do. And if you've ever had to face rotoscoping, you know it's not the most exciting prospect when you come and sit down in front of your system for the day. So I've gotten a bit of a head start. I have this mask that I kind of roughly put around the dog, okay? Remember, this is about 60 frames long, and it's not quite perfect yet. I just need to make a few more adjustments here. There's some sections here. We can bring it in a little closer. The problem is I'm only working on frame 1. This is a lot like our paint example, right? But over time, he moves around, and there's all kinds of stuff happening in front of him, so how am I going to deal with this? Well, this is where the tracking just is really amazing. What I'm going to do, instead of doing any of this by hand, and I could, of course, try to animate this by hand, I'm going to step into the tracker with all of these points selected. And check this out. Every single point becomes a tracker, right? So that's good. Nice. So now I'm going to gang those together. And I'm just going to make them a little bigger. So we're going to give it a fighting chance here. There's not a ton of movement there, but let's see how it does.
Ce que Marc est en train de faire, c'est d'ajouter la zone de tracking. Pour ceux qui ne sont pas familiers avec ça, c'est qu'on détermine dans quelle zone, dans le prochain frame, pourrait se trouver le point qu'on est en train de tracker. Et dans ce cas-ci, il a pris tous les points qu'il y avait tout le tour de son masque et on a autant de points de tracking. Dans le fond, le logiciel s'en fout. Je ne sais pas si vous savez, mais autant de points comme ça dans d'autres applications, vous auriez eu le temps d'aller dîner puis de revenir avant que le tracking soit fini. Puis dans ce cas-ci, ben...
And usually, I get one of them to fall off, but it didn't this time. Actually, I do have a problem with it. So this looks pretty good, but see this one down here? This one's actually acting up a bit. And this is the point I wanted to show you. So this isn't just, you know, a trick. If it works, it's great. You really have a lot of control here. Let's say this point didn't work, or maybe we want to clean up this point or this point over here. I can step back in, and I can find those points. And then if we want to make adjustments, we can just make those a little bigger. We could change the way they track. We could even go into the animation channels and individually adjust every single point, or choose to track only 1 or 2 points. And it's really a time saver if you're doing these kind of tasks, because you'll see what we get is a mask that just goes, oops, I selected the wrong one. That's why it's good we have translation. You can talk over my mistake.
Donc, dans ce cas-ci, c'est vraiment être capable d'utiliser chacun des points indépendamment. Donc, on peut travailler très, très rapidement avec tous les points en groupe ou faire des corrections individuelles un peu partout. C'est très, très facile d'ajuster ça. Puis comme vous avez vu, c'est assez intuitif et c'est rapide. C'est ça qui compte parce que il n'a pas fallu qu'on fasse une job de rotoscopie pendant toute la fin de semaine avec du gros techno dans les oreilles dans son iPhone. Là.
And then we've got our master. And now,
c'est comme ça que tout le monde fait de la roto, non?
Last thing I need to do is integrate him into the scene. Right? So we're going to track him in. And this is, again, another example. The tracker, it's a great tool, shows up everywhere, really comes in handy. You can see it sticks right there. That's not a tracking point. That's just a rock on the ground that we can grab. And what that does is translates that movement to the layer with the dog on it. And then we'll just move him over a little bit. And I can do this different ways. I can grab it right on screen. Let's position it there. And I can start to scale it down. So this is really starting to get to look like we want. Now, the last thing I'm going to do, I'm not going to completely finish this scene. There's a bunch more stuff we can do. But let's change the lighting a little bit, right? Because it doesn't really look like he's in the same environment. And you can see I can start incorporating lights to this. I'll show you a better example in a minute. But I'm actually working in a 3D space. So even though these are flat 2D layers, I'm incorporating some of the 3D aspects that we heard Marcus speak about earlier. And what I want to do is just kind of treat this like almost like a spotlight to maybe kind of create the illusion of that shadow as we work through it here.
Alors, vous voyez, on peut tout le compositing dans Smoke est fait dans un environnement totalement 3D. Donc, c'est pas du 2D+, c'est pas du faux 3D. Il y a vraiment en 3D, vous pouvez ajouter des lumières, vous pouvez ajouter des panneaux et vous pouvez aussi faire de la distorsion. Si on a le temps un petit peu plus tard, on va vous montrer comment on peut tordre des images vraiment en 3D. Vous pouvez importer des modèles 3D aussi. Et là, dans ce cas-ci, ce qu'on va faire, c'est de recréer un environnement. Comme je disais au début, il y a le cheval qui fait de l'ombre là où est le chien. C'est très, très facile de mettre une fausse lune, puis de mettre le même effet sur le chien.
So what I've done while Marc-André was explaining is I want that light to appear to be in the scene. I want it to have some relation to the scene. So I just added another axis, and you can see I went into Smoke's schematic here so I can see all the different elements in my composite. We'll see a more complicated schematic in a second. And I just did a quick track, and then here's the light. So then once I parent these together, now this light is actually going to inherit that motion. So we can start really adjusting this, and I'll just reset it a bit, and let's just find our dog there. There he is. And maybe we'll adjust the intensity a little bit. And then as the horse moves through the scene, we've actually got a little bit, it's very subtle, but it's kind of slightly changing that light just a little bit. So you can see it kind of move through the scene. So again, adding a 3D element into a flat 2D scene to really bring a little bit more realism to it. And then finally, we'll just blur him out a little bit. We could bring the rain back over top, but I think you get the idea of how quickly we can work with this. Maybe make that a Gaussian blur. And then finally, here's the best part. Even when we start getting complicated like this, I can just hit process and I can see the result in about 20 seconds. So it's all about the interactivity as well as the speed with which you can get your result.
Est-ce que ça va vite? Oui, OK. Bon, à part le monde d'Autodesk, est-ce que ça va vite? Mais c'est sûr qu'ils sont convaincus, tu sais. Non, mais c'est très, très interactif. C'est ça qui est le fun. C'est que c'est facile de prendre des images que vous avez montées dans votre application de montage préférée. Je ne la nommerai pas. Et vous amenez vos images ensuite dans Smoke et vous êtes capable d'amener votre montage plus loin. C'est vraiment le but d'une application comme ça, c'est de dire, OK, moi, il y a des trucs que je vais être capable de faire, puis ça serait tout simplement trop long, ou ça serait coûteux, ou ça serait pas beau. Il faut choisir un des trois, ou deux des trois. Et dans ce cas-ci, on est capable de faire plus facilement les trois. On est capable de jouer avec vos images, de les amener à un prochain niveau, et d'essayer des choses. C'est ça la beauté de cet outil-là, c'est que ça va vite, c'est très interactif, vous êtes capable d'essayer toutes sortes de choses.
All right, so I thought I'd finish up with a broadcast example because we can really show off some of the 3D capabilities.
Cool.
So let's start with this one. So a bit of a silly spot that kind of incorporates all of the 3D you could ever want to put into a spot, but really shows off what you can do with 3D. So let me play this one back, and then we'll talk about what we're going to show you.
It's a revolutionary.
Oh, sorry. It might be a little loud. It's okay.
It's a revolutionary new approach to weather coverage. Introducing SkyTrack in 3D. The first weathercast with no boundaries. SkyTrack in 3D. Leaping off the screen. Putting you at the center of the story. Helping you understand.
So you get the idea of what we're doing. So again, a silly spot. What's interesting about this is our friend Brian Mulligan, and his challenge is usually to make something out of nothing. You might want to explain.
Oui. Alors oui, hein, ce spot-ci a été fait par Brian Mulligan qui travaille pour... Where is he working on?
WTHR in Indianapolis.
Voyons. C'est ça, en Indianapolis. Et ce qui se passe, c'est que Brian reçoit souvent du matériel et il doit tout faire dans Smoke. Donc, il s'en sert autant pour faire son offline, tout le créatif, le online, puis il présente ça après. C'est une station de télévision, puis il faut qu'il invente des spots à partir de rien. C'est aussi un artiste Smoke accompli qui adore Smoke et qui est capable de pousser l'outil à son maximum à partir de rien. Donc, lui, il n'est pas parti d'un montage dans Final Cut ou dans un vide. Il y a eu les shots. On les amène dans Smoke et on fait tout de A à Z avec l'application.
Okay, so I've got the elements there. You saw it was a green screen and a studio shot, and he's got to create something out of nothing. So we're just going to jump ahead a little bit, and I'll just kind of give you a tour of what we've got going on. We've taken our weather guy here, and basically we've keyed him out. So you can see we're using our keyer there to key him out and to remove that background. We've also got our studio shots, which we've also done some green screen keying in, and then we've tracked our logo into some of these monitors. So just some simple 4-point tracking. He's here, he's got a glow on it. But this is where we really can take advantage of the 3D workspace here in Smoke, because you'll see what we've done is actually built this scene in 3D. So being able to expand that out in Z-Space is pretty cool, even though these are just 2D layers. What I want to do, though, is incorporate some actual geometry into it. And you can see our schematic starting to grow there. And I'll go ahead and I'll just import something simple. Let's use a 3ds Studio model. And I'll just grab everyone's favorite, the teapot, and drop it in here. And if I do a Z sort, you'll see that that's actually a true piece of geometry, right? So you can start incorporating things like that. Even if I take this light and unhide it, see, I can start, oops, I hid everything. Let's do selected there. Then I can take the light and start to have that affect the scene. And you can see it's hitting those different layers on the different planes as it comes through. Okay, so this isn't the final look we're going for, so we'll hide that light for the moment, and we really don't want our teapot in there. What we want to bring in are some of those elements, those weather elements.
Ce qui est important à voir ici, c'est que Marc a importé un modèle 3D dans la scène. Donc, il y a plusieurs applications. Il y a Motion qui fait ça, il y a After Effects qui fait ça. On est capable de faire du compositing en 3D. Dans ce cas-ci, on a un environnement en 3D qui était là à la base. Donc, on est capable d'importer des lumières, des modèles, des caméras FBX, donc les modèles avec l'animation. Si vous travaillez, par exemple, sur Mac avec des applications comme Maya, comme Cinema 4D, vous êtes capable d'importer vos scènes en FBX directement dans l'application et de continuer à travailler. Donc, vous n'avez pas besoin d'avoir l'application 3D, mais des fois, il y a des trucs que vous seriez obligé de retourner dans Cinema 4D, faire une petite retouche au niveau du shading, au niveau des ombrages. Et là, vous êtes capable de le faire directement ici. Et ce qu'on va faire, c'est qu'on va l'incorporer à même la scène. Donc, ce que Marc va faire, c'est qu'il va changer la distance dans le Z depth du soleil pour être capable de faire une rotation du soleil autour du gars, le présentateur.
All right, so what I've done is I've brought in a second camera just because I think this is an interesting way to look at the composite as it comes together. So let me select the correct camera there. And what I'll do is I'll zoom back, and you'll see that you can actually, through this scene, you can actually add multiple cameras, multiple layers, multiple lights. And this is a really great way to work. So what I want to do is I want to create the effect we saw of that sun sort of rotating around this person who's standing there. And watch how easily you can do this. I'll just bring an axis into our scene, and I'll parent it to, not that one, let's see, wake up, to that one, the layer that controls the sun there. And I want to offset that, so I'll just take the center point, and you can see I can bring this right up to where he is. You can see the axis moving there on the right. And then that gives me the ability to then start rotating and spinning this around. So a really simple trick, but you can see it's actually taking advantage of the fact that that's actually set out in 3D. And what I'll do is just go back to frame 1 and maybe set a keyframe, go to the end and set a keyframe. And what's great is I'm working with auto key framing here. Just to give you an idea, you have access to every one of these parameters. So there's just a massive amount of data that you can work with here. But for what we're doing, I can just work with it visually on screen. It's a really fast way to work with these elements. And then if we go back to our standard result camera, let's go up to a one-up view, you can see that now we've got our scene coming together. So being able to create these 3D scenes very quickly is really nice. If you're doing broadcast work, or even if you're doing post work and need to incorporate, import a 3D track or something, having that real camera is amazing. And I'll show the text presets while you sort of explain that.
Donc, I said it before. You were saying
oh,
so.
see, I got to learn French.
Basically, quand Marc est arrivé, j'ai demandé, est-ce que tu as pratiqué ton français? Là? Il dit,
yeah, well, okay. So we won't go too deep into it. Your
Alors,
3D text
on a des presets de texte en 3D aussi qui sont disponibles. C'est drôle parce que quand on faisait nos premières rencontres avec les gens, je me souviens que dans une boîte, on est allé, il y a quelqu'un qui a dit « Oui, mais le texte en 3D, c'est kitten. »
All right, well, I won't make this too much uglier, but you get the idea that you can really start coming in and creating
Comme
in
ça.
3D.
Mais l'idée, c'est que vous n'êtes pas obligé de faire des effets kitten, finalement. Dans ce cas-ci, on regarde une animation qui est assez élaborée, qui marche très, très bien, je suis sûr, dans un network à Indianapolis. Mais le fait de travailler dans un environnement 3D, vous pouvez prendre ces outils-là puis de créer des trucs beaucoup plus subtils. Je ne sais pas si vous avez remarqué l'introduction de notre keynote avec toutes les couches qui se promenaient. Ça, c'est le genre d'effet un peu plus subtil qui est intéressant à développer et qui est facile à faire avec Smoke. I was just saying that, you know, you've got these, you were saying how tacky this thing is, but you don't have to do tacky things. You've got, you can have very subtle details and use the 3D environment to your advantage.
No, 3D just gives you, I think Philippe has said it, it's like another dimension to work in. It's a way to sort of cheat to get composites to work. You saw it with the lighting effect, using some 3D there, and there's just so many ways to use 3D that you might not have thought of. And when you have these tools and it's enabled, it's amazing what you can do with them. So, and that's it. And I rendered that quick little scene out, and you saw it went fast. And
can we see
that's
it?
our quick, sure. Yeah, I didn't render the whole thing. But you can see, and there's some field motion in there because that's field-based.
Because it's interlaced. How about distorting the background? Because I know that's the one thing that you can't do in your 2.5D applications.
Sure. Well, it depends on what we're looking at for the background here. Let's actually bring it in this way. And I'll just go ahead and add a new media layer. If I can find it here, that works. I have a messy desktop. And I'm just going to turn the mat off for a second. And let's just so you can see what's going on, we'll take this new layer and we'll solo it just so you can see. Because what's cool about this is every piece of video, regardless of what it is, what resolution, doesn't really matter. It's all mapped to a 3D plane. So what's cool about that is I can say, let's start adjusting the edges, and you saw some corner pinning before. But you can really take this to the extreme, and I can say, well, let's make this what we call an extended bicubic and then subdivide it. And now I can start grabbing points here. I'll just do something like this, and I'm actually bending that around, right? And then if I add any lights to this, it's going to start interacting in 3D space with it, if I can turn off solo there. I've got to fix that solo button, Philippe. So let me undo the solo there, and I'll just, let me bring it forward here. This is why we generally stay on script in demo, Marc-André. But seriously, it is fun to play around like this, because what we're doing is we're actually creating that as a surface, right? And you can see it start to interact. So getting back to what you initially said you wanted to do, let's throw away that version and we'll bring it back in as a DVE object. And if we wanted to make that the background, you can do something like this. We'll just take it and we'll go into our extended bicubic mode. And I'll just grab these points, and you can. It's almost like you know, it's like creating those sort of virtual cyc walls where we kind of bend it back, and it just gives you a lot of latitude when you're mixing with these 3D planes like this. And let's just do a quick Z sort. And you can see we can start to bend it out like that. So, whatever you want to do here, it's great.
Donc, si vous avez un layer que vous amenez dans une composition, puis il n'est pas tout à fait assez haut, pas tout à fait assez large, c'est assez facile de distorsionner votre image pour 40, pour pouvoir aussi, dans ce cas-ci, on a créé de la fausse profondeur. C'est le fun dans ce cas-ci parce qu'on a un virtual set. Mais ça a été assez facile d'intégrer tous les éléments en 2D, des éléments en 3D. On a du tracking, on a du corner pinning parce qu'on a pris nos images, on les a mis dans les télévisions, dans le coin. Ça a été simple d'intégrer toutes ces images-là et ça reste quand même interactif. On travaille en 3D, on travaille avec des lumières, on travaille avec des modèles et ça répond quand même assez vite.
And that's it.
Et c'est la fin de notre démonstration. J'espère que vous avez pu voir comment que ça peut rentrer dans votre workflow Final Cut. Moi, c'est sûr que quand j'ai commencé à travailler là-dessus, pour moi, je me souvenais de ma fameuse session de Smoke il y a 10 ans en me disant « OK, il y a 10 ans quand j'avais mon petit Avid Express puis que j'étais pas capable de travailler avec ça, c'est sûr que je me suis dit maintenant, OK, c'est beau, j'espère qu'il y a d'autres gens ici qui travaillent avec Final Cut, qui travaillent avec Avid, qui font des beaux produits, qui font de la belle création, qui sont capables de rajouter ça dans leur arsenal d'outils pour amener leur production à un autre niveau. Puis si on va avoir fait ça, bien, on va avoir accompli notre mission.